And then the other section, it said like less than a certain number per milliliter or whatever it was.
Yeah. And so I was like, that was the first time through this was like August, September.
Something like that.
Probably around August, I think. This was the first time where I kind of really broke down. And I was like, what the hell?
Yeah.
I was like, what is this? How is this possible? Like, after it wasn't working, I thought there'd be like something wrong, but I assumed it would be relatively minor. And
yeah, like
there'd be
a lower chance, but not no chance.
And so because of those results, your doctor then referred you to the same fertility clinic, but to the urologist who is there. And it takes, like, in our town, that's the only fertility clinic.
Yeah.
And there's obviously high demand for it. And so the whole process takes insanely long, which anyone who's been through infertility, I'm sure, can sympathize with that. They know it takes.
Especially the whole, like, starting off, it takes a year of not being able to succeed before you can even start the process of seeing your doctor, or at least having them take you seriously. And
so we were referred in August, and we got our appointments both in October. And so my appointment for both of us, like just the initial appointment, was at the end of October. And then after your results and being referred, you actually got in to see the urologist at the clinic, and therefore becoming a patient of the clinic at the beginning of October.
Yeah.
And so, which kind of was in a way beneficial, because you went to go see the urologist, and within 5-10 minutes?
Well, yeah. So he looked at my results of the
semen analysis
and did a physical exam, and within like 2 minutes. He told me later on, he told me that he knew right away, basically, but he did an exam, and after 2 or 3 minutes, he had an idea of what the problem was. Yeah, like he mentioned in a later appointment that basically he knew right away once he couldn't feel a vas deferens. He knew what the problem was.
Well, he diagnosed you immediately with congenital bilateral absence of the vas deferens.
Yeah.
Which basically just means that you were born essentially with a irreversible vasectomy.
Yeah.
So the vas deferens, the little tube that carries the sperm out, isn't there.
Yeah.
And
which also
shocking, really.
Well, not only does it not carry the sperm out, but it also kind of explains previously why the first test I also had a low volume, because there's no vas deferens, so there's no actual seminal fluid either. There's other fluids that come in, but it's much less than you'd expect.
Yeah. And so he then goes on to ask you, he asks you, he says,
maybe,
do you have cystic fibrosis? And of course you're like, no.
Yeah. That question came out of nowhere.
Yeah, and you're like, no, I'm 28, 27.
Yeah.
No, I don't. And he's like, well, I'm going to send you for genetic testing, because this diagnosis is very common in patients with cystic fibrosis.
Yeah.
And so you had to go through a battery of...
Well, the first one I think was the sweat test, right?
No, that was after.
Was it?
Mm-hmm.
What was the first test?
Blood tests.
Oh, okay,
you had to go for blood tests.
Okay.
That got sent to the Children's Hospital in Toronto and here.
Yeah.
Right? And then, so you did the genetic testing for cystic fibrosis, specifically to see if you have cystic fibrosis, and then you did a full genetic workup, right?
Yes. Not full. They did a chromosomal analysis.
Okay, yeah. And then, of course, that takes several weeks to a couple of months to get back. And the chromosomal one took several months.
Yeah, like 6 months almost, I think.
Yeah. But we got your cystic fibrosis test back, and it came back positive, which was completely kind of shocking.
Yeah.
And you go into it thinking, okay, we're going to have to deal with some fertility stuff, never imagining that you're also going to get smacked with a diagnosis of cystic fibrosis.
Yeah, that came out of nowhere, because if you've ever, I didn't know anyone with cystic fibrosis. I've never, the only reference I'd ever heard to cystic fibrosis was that series of commercials that ran, 5 or 10 years ago. where someone with basically very low lung function, and I just never seen it, so I'd never experienced it.
Right. And so they told us right away, you have to do IVF.
Yeah.
The only way to get pregnant if you have this condition is through IVF, because you do produce sperm, it just can't get out.
And it can't mature.
And it can't mature. Yeah.
We've learned about these things long.
Basically, it doesn't get the tail.
Yeah.
It doesn't have the tail, which has nothing to do with
the baby tadpole.
Which has nothing to do with like the genetic part of it or the actual function of creating a baby. It just can't swim to where it needs to go.
Like inside the egg.
Yeah.
It can't move. And
so we had to do IVF with ICSI, which means that they take one sperm and they inject it directly into my egg.
Yeah.
So that was shocking. But before we could even go ahead with that, I had to get tested to see if I was a carrier for cystic fibrosis or had cystic fibrosis, but most likely carrier, because if I was a carrier and you having cystic fibrosis, it means that our child had
50%
chance of getting the disease.
Yeah.
But I guess before we move on to the processes of IVF,
is there a spoiler alert needed here?
No, I was going to say we should clarify that you've been checked out. You're a patient at the cystic fibrosis clinic here in town, and as far as I can tell, he's perfectly healthy. Other than this, so he's going to be monitored for life because you never know. Something could develop, but they're very optimistic that he's in good health and there should be no real other complications.
The Cystic Fibrosis Clinic, they have a lot of patients who come in on a regular basis needing antibiotics and get seen every few weeks or every month or something to make sure that they're on track. Mm-hmm. I go every year and I've never needed antibiotics. I've never needed antibiotics for any lung thing. So it's very different and a very kind of weird situation to be going there.
Mm-hmm. And so then I had to go for the blood test for genetic testing. That took, again, several weeks to get back, but it came back negative. So I'm not a carrier for cystic fibrosis, which means that our children would have no chance of having cystic fibrosis.
There need to be like new genetic mutations, basically.
Which is very, very unlikely.
Rare enough that anyone could have that happen.
But they will be a carrier. Which causes no health concerns. The only thing is when they're older and they want to have babies, their partner is going to have to get tested.
Yeah.
To see if, and then they can make a decision based on those results.
This is again all stuff we learned after, but basically there's a 1 in 21 or something chance
25
of people of a Canadian being a carrier. So it's the background of the population has a 25 a 1 in 4 chance of being a carrier. So it's not that weird to be a carrier.
Yeah.
It's just most people don't know they're a carrier.
And so we said, okay, let's go ahead with IVF, which we can get into details of that maybe in another interview or another video. But we did a cycle in March of 2017.
That sounds right. I trust your math.
Yeah, March of 2017. And it was unsuccessful. And that was devastating.
Yeah. One of the reasons that we want to do this is that we want to kind of remember what it was like to go through, because a lot of that time we kind of forget what it was like. And like Julia said, because of this diagnosis, we need to do IVF if we want to have kids.
And I guess backtracking a little bit before we got into IVF, the fertility clinic had to run a huge battery of tests on me, and everything came out normal. In fact, I was told by the doctor that I was super fertile. Mm-hmm. So going into IVF, knowing that, you just assume, well, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm like in perfectly good condition. I don't know. Mm-hmm. So you put a fertilized egg inside me, my body's just going to accept it. All right. Sorry. So yeah, like I was saying, I'm told there's nothing wrong with me. Everything looks great. So you just kind of think it's going to work. You invest a lot of time, a lot of money into something, and a lot of like hopes and wishes.
With like a 50%, like putting all your money on a coin flip, it's really, it's difficult.
And where we live, we live in Canada, and our province has funding for IVF treatment, but it's a one cycle in your lifetime funding.
Yeah.
And there's an insanely long wait list.
And it gets longer, I think, for the funding. Like when we started, it was
that's because
9 months or something.
It was
now it's over a year.
It was relatively new, so people. And so, like I mentioned earlier, I want something, I go get it. So I was like, I'm not waiting for that. Let's pay for it. And it didn't work. So at that point, I'm left. You're still relatively hopeful. You're saying it'll work.
I'm still very hopeful.
And I'm like devastated, going, it's not going to work. It didn't work the first time. Why is it going to work the second time? But we go back to the clinic. We go over my cycle. We had no embryos left to freeze either. So that's an important part of this. We did a cycle and we didn't have any embryos left to freeze. So in order to try again, we had to do the complete cycle over again. We go back, we see our doctor. She puts us on a new protocol. And so we're set to go.